Hey folks, my name is JR. Welcome to DIY Prepper Reloaded. When it comes to gun accessories, a lot of us like to go a little bit crazy. Some of our ARs look more done up than a teenage girl getting ready for prom. I mean, it gets to the point where we wonder how in the world they're even functional. But one accessory that's really hard to overdo is magazines. They're the heart of any semi-automatic gun that you have because without them, all you have is a janky single shot that's even slower to use than a real single shot because they were never designed to be used that way. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of these on hand. And aside from the fact that your guns won't work without them, there are other reasons why having a good stockpile of magazines is important. First, they're some of the first things to get banned or regulated. Every time some loser does something awful, there are droves of politicians about to urinate themselves over the opportunity to ban magazines. The guy could have used a single action revolver, but they would still somehow blame magazines, and you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you can't get what you need because it's either all illegal all of a sudden or people are scooping them up as soon as they hit the shelves because they're scared they're going to be illegal. That happened to me when I bought my AR towards the end of 2012. I picked it up around Thanksgiving, thought I'd just pick up mags a little later because I was busy with work and I wouldn't be able to shoot it anyway for a little while. And then lo and behold, some moron did something terrible and the politicians were off to the races and everybody's panic buying, and it was at least a couple very stressful months later before I even saw PMags that get on shelves. But then magazines are also wear items. They get dropped while you're training or practicing, and they can also start to have issues just from regular use, like springs can start to lose strength, followers may get damaged, and feed lips can also get bent. And then magazines are fairly easy to lose as well. A lot of us try to keep some stashed in like EDC bags in the center console of our car or a range bag, and over the course of life, you may just lose track of one or two of them. Now, that's not good, but we live in the real world where we don't pretend stuff like that doesn't happen. Now, when it comes to the actual number of magazines everyone should have, some of that depends on how you use your guns and if your firearms are your main priority. If you're someone who just likes to shoot and it's your only real hobby, then you can go nuts. But I know that a good portion of you that watch this channel are also into emergency preparedness. You probably came over from other channel, and if you're a prepper, you have a lot more that you need to spend money on than just guns. There's things like food storage, water filtration, and backup energy that you'll want to have in addition to copious amounts of guns, ammo, and mags. You have to figure out how to balance all that out, but I think that there are some reasonable bare minimum amounts that most of us can go by, and those will depend on what that specific gun will be used for. But that being said, once again, if you can afford to have a few crates of magazines laying around, that probably wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. They're useful to have and aren't exactly the worst long-term investment either, Enron. But the first type of gun that we'll talk about is your primary defensive handgun. This could be what you use for concealed carry, what your bedside gun, or what you would use if things went totally sideways. And I know that this goes kind of against the definition of primary, but I actually have two that I consider primary handguns. First, I have my CZ75P01, which is my concealed carry. That's what I'll have on me if someone's brain poops the bed and they try to rob me, aliens invade while I'm picking up tacos, or anything else in between. Then my other primary handgun is a CZ75SP01 Tactical, and yes, I know that other people make good guns too, but there's a reason why I have two guns from the same family, and I'm going to get more into that later, but the SP01 Tactical was my bedside gun for a while, and it's now what I keep in my fighting rig at all times, unless it's up on my glorious gun channel wall.
Oh yeah.
But for defensive handguns, I consider 3 or 4 mags to be the absolute bare bones minimum, and even that's pretty low. That number's just enough to be able to use the gun at the range or for concealed carry or home defense. Having 3 or 4 mags will allow you to have one in the gun and a couple of extras to use as spares or for practice. But I personally feel a lot more comfortable having somewhere between 7 and 10 magazines for that kind of weapon. You want to have extras because pistol magazines are firearm specific, and that can be a big problem if you're not shooting a Glock or some other very common firearm that's going to have magazines spread out all across the desolate apocalyptic wasteland. But if you're like me and you can't just walk into most gun stores and find mags for your gun, definitely get them before you need them. And one really good place to pick up accessories that you may need and various types of survival gear is Outlast Supply, who I'd like to thank for sponsoring the channel. They sell a lot of high quality gear from the best names in the business. I've ordered stuff from them before. The shipping was fast and I got exactly what I ordered. And I would recommend them to any of my friends or family. And if y'all want to check them out, you can find out how to do that in the description below. And they're also giving y'all 10% off orders until June 30th. So be sure to check that out. Next up, we have secondary handguns. An example of this would be my Glock 20 10mm, which I use as my woods gun. We have a lot of feral hogs around here, and I feel a little better having something with a little extra power. Then maybe some of y'all have larger collections where you have several pistols, and some get used more than others, but you still want all of them to be functional. And for these secondary guns, I think 3 or 4 is still a good minimum amount. It'll give you basic usability and shouldn't cost a whole lot of money. I mean, a lot of guns come with 3 mags anyway. My Glock 20 did. Then if it makes you feel better, you could always bump that up to 5 or 7 mags if you wanted to. That'd probably be a more comfy spot. Now, when it comes to defensive rifles, this is where we're going to see numbers jump up quite a bit. Your rifle is going to be your primary weapon if things get really bad because they're significantly more powerful than handguns, and standard capacity magazines for rifles can usually hold a lot more rounds than standard capacity handgun magazines can. Rifles are also easier to shoot accurately at longer distances and can pull double duty as hunting guns also. So because of that, you want to have more magazines for them. I consider 7 mags to be the bare bones minimum for rifles. That'll be enough to fill the pouches in most fighting rigs, whether you have like an older Alice rig or a plate carrier. And you also have one left for the rifle itself. That's the basic load for the U.S. Army, and it's a good place to start. However, I think 12 to 15 mags per rifle is a little more realistic. That'll give you a decent buffer if you have magazines start to wear out, or if you have to ditch one in a fight. That isn't ideal, but it's a lot better than getting killed over a $13 piece of plastic. And speaking of that $13, the good thing about rifle mags, at least when it comes to ARs, is that they're pretty cheap. If you compare that $13 for this versus $20 or $30 for a mag for my CZ, it's going to be a lot easier to stockpile these in larger quantities. Then after that is secondary long guns. These are most likely going to be things that you'd use for hunting or practice, like bolt-action rifles or 22s. And for these, I would say that 3 is probably the minimum that you'd want to have, with 5 being a little better. Magazines like those, they're not going to see as much use or abuse as a run-and-gun rifle will, but you definitely want to have more than the 1 mag that came with your gun. Like with some handgun mags, you may not be able to just wander into a store and buy magazines for those. The exception, of course, being the 1022 because they're everywhere. So since they can be a little hard to find, go ahead and get them now. But when it comes to stockpiling magazines, there are always a few rules that I try to follow. First, get good mags. There's no sense in spending money on something that's going to jam up your gun. It'll just be incredibly annoying at the range and could get you killed if you ever have to depend your life on that janky piece of junk. Factory magazines are usually a safe bet, especially when it comes to companies like Glock. I like Metgars for my CZs. Whoopsie. They're the factory OEM manufacturer for a lot of gun companies, so their stuff is usually really good. Then for ARs, almost all of my mags are P mags. They're extremely reliable and some of the least expensive that you can find out of all types of magazines. If you're having to choose between a $10 bargain bin mag and a $13 P mag, you'd have to be having a wet brain fart to not go with the P mag. Also, be sure to test your guns and magazines with your ammo. Make sure that all of your combinations work, because sometimes they don't, especially with like defensive hollow points. For example, my factory mags for my CZ SP01 Tactical don't feed hollow points for some reason, but the factory mags for my P01, which is also by CZ, they don't have any issues at all. But that's something you'd much rather find out at the range rather than if you're under attack by a herd of idiots. So test all of your stuff. Then if you have multiple firearms, try to have at least some level of magazine compatibility between them. That's part of the reason why my 2 main defensive handguns are both some type of CZ75. The longer 16 and 19 round magazines for the SP01 will fit into the P01. Now, that doesn't work the other way around because the P01's mags are a little shorter, but when it comes to concealed carry and bedside gun combos or guns between family members, it's a good idea to standardize things if you can. You might not always be able to do that. Like my wife, she cannot shoot my my CZ75s because of how far the trigger reaches for. Now, yes, I know I could do trigger reach reduction kits, blah, 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 but I've had these guns forever, and I like the way that they shoot. So she's probably just going to get something else, and we'll have to stockpile mags for those. Then another thing that I try to do is stick with standard capacity magazines, and what that is will depend on your specific gun. Handguns vary widely from one make and model to the next. Like, I got 15 round Glock magazines, 16 round CZs, and 14 round CZs, 18, 19, blah, blah, blah. But for things like ARs and AKs, 30 rounders are what most people consider standard capacity. I try to stay away from the long stick mags and drum mags just because they can be finicky. Of course, there are exceptions to that, but I like the standard ones because I know that they're reliable and they also fit into pouches a lot easier. But it's important to remember that magazines aren't the only thing that you may want to have spares of, especially if you need to keep your guns running in a long-term disaster. So, if you want to see the parts and other supplies that you need to keep your guns running pretty much forever, then click here. Or if you want to see how well your stockpile ammo would perform if you actually had to use it on something, then click here. Once again, I'd like to thank Outlast Supply for sponsoring us today. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.